We'll now move back to the proposition, where we'll be hearing from David Enright. David Enright is a partner at the law firm Howe+Co and is a regular commentator on national and international media on high-profile legal issues. He is also a Justice of the Peace and a visiting fellow at University College London. Some of David's notable cases include the Gurkha Justice Campaign, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sex Abuse, and the Grenfell Tower Public Inquiry. David, the floor is yours.
Madam President, House, first of all, I would like to thank Laura and Thomas for their excellent contributions, albeit I think that Laura jumped ship and Father O'Loughlin should be given a couple of extra minutes. Secondly, I'd like to thank Sister Simmons and Father O'Loughlin. They're like Daniel and Daniela in the Lion's Den this evening. My junior partner, Richard Score, and I have spent the last 3 years working on the Roman Catholic Church Child Abuse Inquiry, and not surprisingly, from the pantheon of sins available, we choose the sin of clerical child abuse that has plagued the Catholic Church for decades. In summary, Sister Simmons argues that child abuse happens throughout society. Everybody's at it. So don't pick on the Catholic Church. Well, the Church holds itself out as the arbiter of right and wrong, and as such, it must be held to the highest standard. On any standard, it fails on child abuse. In 2018, Pope Francis called for every member of the Catholic Church to pray and fast in penance for the evil of clerical sex abuse. It's a bit like asking the extended family of a rape victim to pray and fast to atone for the actions of the rapist. Last month, the Tablet published an article entitled "The Church Must Atone for Its Sins of Abuse." Clearly, they were looking over the shoulder of the Cambridge Union. The article reported on statements of Father Hans Zollner, a Jesuit like Sister Simmons. He is the Catholic Church's child abuse czar. He questioned why the Church asked individual Catholics to confess their sins and atone for them, but the Church itself, as an institution, failed to do so. But the Pope's statement is consistent with the Church's usual approach to its failings, its sins. Rather than accepting failure and making change, the Church seeks to spread and pass the blame to its adherents. Now, my worthy opponents may argue that the Church atones for its sins every day. At the start of every Catholic Mass, the Confiteor is recited aloud. I confess to Almighty God, to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned in my thoughts and in my words, in what I have done and what I have failed to do, through my most grievous fault. Therefore, I ask Blessed Mary, all the angels and saints, and you, my brothers and sisters, to pray for me to the Lord our God. However, it is the lay body of the Church, the flock, that is atoning. The shepherds and shepherdesses, not so much. In wealthy secular countries, the power and influence of the Church is waning, and thus whether it does or doesn't accept its failings may be less important. But this is not the case for millions living in poverty, desperation and fear around the world, who have nothing to cling to but their faith and the Church. I grew up in Derry in the north of Ireland in the 70s and 80s. I remember my playmates with ringworm on their faces and boys with calipers on their legs because they had scurvy. I remember soldiers on the streets and in my home, helicopters in the sky. I remember not being allowed to play outside on the 12th of July because where I lived, it wasn't a good 12th unless a Catholic home was burnt. I remember my father grabbing my hand and dragging me through the streets of Bogside to escape gunfire. I remember policemen walking with his family to Mass being shot to death on my doorstep. I remember Father Daly waving a blood-stained handkerchief as he led a terrified group of people carrying a boy who'd been shot to death on Bloody Sunday. I remember when Catholics finally gained the full right to vote in 1972. I remember being stripped to my underpants in broad daylight on the main street of my city by grinning squaddies. And I remember when I made it home and my mother took me in her arms and she said, "Offer it up to Jesus, offer it up to Jesus." I also remember when we gathered in our thousands in St. Eugene's Cathedral, so many of us that we spilled out onto the streets. The priests and nuns were our heroes. In our time of crisis, the Church was our shelter, our anchor, our place of safety. It is suffice to say that I do not believe in God, but I will be a Catholic until the day I die. Now, I tell you these stories to give you just a tiny flavor of how all-embracing and profound the Church's influence was in our lives and still is in the lives of many millions around the world for whom life is hunger, fear, insecurity, and the knowledge that life holds no hope, except accept the hope the church offers to some extent in life and certainly in the next. In life, the church feeds, clothes, protects, and champions the most needy and desperate around the world. In death, the church offers heaven, something to hope for when you have nothing to hope for in this life. As a result of all of this, the church not only does much good, but also exerts enormous power and influence over its members. And this is where it gets difficult. When things go wrong, as they always will, in a massive international organization, two things need to happen. First, the organization needs to be willing and able to admit it and take steps necessary to change. Second, its customers must feel able to challenge the organization. Looking at the first point, the church cannot and will not admit its failings or change. Its structure, culture, and law prevent this. The church is not a single organization like a pyramid with a pope on top. It is comprised of hundreds of wholly separate organizations, each a little fiefdom of its own, with their own rules and culture. The church's law, canon law, reinforces that separation and the many silos of the church. It mandates a bishop to uphold the independence of Catholic orders. Canon 983 prohibits a priest hearing of child abuse in a confessional, reporting this to the civil authorities. Canon 984 prohibits a priest hearing of child abuse in the confessional, even using that in line management responsibility. For example, if a children's group leader confesses child abuse in a confession, the priest cannot use that to ask them to step aside. Canon 1395 defines child abuse as adultery. Thus, even if the church wanted to implement uniform high standards of child protection, it cannot. Its structure, its law, and its culture prevent it. That the church will not change goes without saying. The church has demonstrably failed to address this tsunami of child abuse that has swamped it for decades. What of the church's customers? Well, the fact is that most Catholics simply cannot bring themselves to accept that their place of refuge, the font and seat of their faith, is imperfect. Nor can they accept that shepherds of their souls could possibly harm children. To do so is almost to deny God. Now, that may seem hard to believe, but let me explain it by telling you a secret. I appear before you this evening a physically strong man, financially secure, successful and respected lawyer, known for being fearless in my representation of my clients. My mother taught me to advance towards danger, never to run away from it. And yet, as I speak to you, my culture, my heritage, my history, the faith I tell myself I do not hold, cries out to me to defend Sister Simmons and Father O'Loughlin. Those instincts, born of my Catholic upbringing, go so deep they cannot be shaken off. The church knows it, and the church uses it. So, if I, with all my advantages, feel an almost physical pain in challenging the church, what chance does a poor child in Mali, Malaysia, Mozambique have in resisting abuse at the hands of a man of God? What chance does the suspecting mother of such a child have when she relies on the church not just for hope and salvation, but perhaps also for food, education, and medicine? We all know the answer. She has no chance. We've seen this in every country in the world where the church operates. The Pope knows it, Father Zollner knows it, and so does Sister Simmons and Father O'Loughlin. So, should the church atone for its sins? Well, in relation to the sins of clerical abuse and protecting child abusers and allowing child abuse to continue and refusing to do anything about it, yes, it should. Will the church do so? No, it won't, not unless people like us do something about it. Finally, whether you are a person of faith or not, every person of good conscience knows that we are all each other's keeper. Should the church atone for its sins? Yes, it should. Should you support this motion? I leave it to your conscience. Thank you so much.